Hey, Mission Church, welcome to Summer Selah. Selah is a word we find in the Bible over 70 times, and it means to practice intentional rest. And so that's what we're doing for these last 2 weekends in July. As a church, as a staff, as our volunteer teams, we are taking an intentional rest. And so wherever you find yourself today, whether you're just hanging out at home with some friends, or maybe you're at a hotel on vacation, or hanging out at your lake house, we pray that you are leaning in, slowing down, and spending time with your Father, taking an intentional rest. So let's dive into today's message.
Hey, welcome to part 2 of Summer Selah. My name is John, and I'm thrilled to be with you guys. Shooting this in a home, and you're watching this in a home. 15 years ago, Mission Church started in my home, and it's just pretty cool that we get to gather like this twice a year as a church to take this intentional pause. The church building is closed, but the church is never closed. It's always open, because wherever your 2 feet are, that's where the church just showed up. We're excited to see you guys next weekend as we reopen. Ministry season is going to begin here in August, back to our normal service times. Pedal is on the right. Super excited for what I believe God's going to do this next ministry season. But right now, we are selahing. We are selahing. I just turned it into a verb. This is what we're doing. We're resting. We're pausing. And this is something that you and I practice. Last week, I talked about a theology of work, and today I'm going to talk about a theology of rest. Most Christians that I run into live life without either, and it is costing them in a significant way. They live life with no margin. In the classic book, Margin, he says, margin is really the space between your load and your limits. And most people have no space between the load they're carrying and their limits. And so right now we're practicing this thing called Selah that really builds in this margin in our life daily and weekly. So when I say the word Selah, you can use it interchangeably with some different things. So it's a pause. It's a time to rest. And so do that daily and weekly. Daily for me is chair time in the morning. It's sitting in my chair. Those of you dads that have been to Camp Paradise, that's where we learned how to Selah, Camp Paradise style. Some of those dads, you guys are at camp right now, which is awesome. So you sit in that Adirondack chair. For me, it's a chair in my living room every morning. That is my daily Selah. And then a lot of times it's a wonder walk where I walk for 30 minutes with no technology, and I experience God in creation. God speaks in 3 ways, and creation is one of those. And so that's my daily Selah. And then we have a weekly Selah. God's people, since a very, very, very long time, have been seeing one day out of the 7 as holy and different, like set apart. And so this is what we're going to look at today. That's called a Sabbath or a Shabbat, which literally means to stop. And so we need a theology of rest, don't we? The part in Psalm 139 that we're looking at right now, we've been saying, man, imagine what life could really look like and feel like and be like if the background music of our life was the Word of God, if the underscoring of your life was truth. Imagine what our summer could look like if the soundtrack of our summer was Psalm 139. And so we're teaching through Psalm 139, and David says this in verse 2. He says, "You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways." And we're just saying, hey, God is familiar with your work, and he's familiar with your rest. He sees your 9 to 5, and he sees your beyond 9 to 5. He sees it all. He sees how you are working and how you're working and the motives in which you're going to work with. And he sees your times of rest or lack thereof. And so we are saying, all right, we need a theology for work. And that's what we did last week. Work is worship, and to worship is to work. So important that we don't compartmentalize our life and say, well, no, only on Sunday morning, that's my worship time, not according to the Word of God, not according to the people of God. No, all of life is worship, including our 9 to 5. So we need a theology of work. How about a theology of rest? And so if you would, come with me again back to the very beginning. Now, when we are building our theology, we don't start with us, we start with God. And so this is what we see in the very beginning in Genesis chapter 2. This is what I read to you guys last week. Genesis chapter 2, the creation story is incredible. It's so important. And this is what we're seeing in Genesis chapter 2. Look there in verse 2. By the seventh day, God had finished, underline that, finished all the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, say this with me, he rested. He rested from all, you may want to circle all. Some of you are like, how about some? He rested from all his work. Verse 3, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Now, we're New Testament Christians. We don't live under the law, but it's God. I can't find any place in scriptures like, hey, no longer is that day important. No, he made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So last week we looked at work. This week, let's look at rest. When we open up the Bible, the story of God begins with seeing our God who demonstrates work and rest. Our theology of rest is built on what we see God do. Let me ask you this question. Did God rest in the creation story because he was tired? Did God rest in the creation story because he was absolutely burnt out? Did God rest in the creation story because he had reached the end of himself? No. That's not why God rested. God rested to teach us. God rested to model to us, because what God does next is God shows and then calls us to do as he did. For the rest of the Old Testament, you will see that God calls his children to live as he is, to reflect him in this world, to bear his image. How do you and I bear the image of God? How do you and I look like our Heavenly Father? One of the greatest compliments I ever received was when people will tell me, you remind me a lot of your dad. Maybe it's after a sermon where I've handled the word pretty well, and they used to hear my dad preach like, you remind me of your dad. Man, what a compliment. And yet, as followers of Jesus, as sons and daughters of God, this is the greatest compliment we can get when you and I bear the image of God. And we do that by how we work, and we do that by how we rest. We're talking about today a theology of rest. Are you able to stop? I know that you are a human being, but you're not a human doing. And it doesn't mean that we don't do stuff, but a lot of times, don't we forget that we're a human being? Don't we forget that different than God, you and I are actually limited? Don't we forget oftentimes that you and I were created to understand work according to how God would have us? Last week, I shared with you guys work is good, but let me finish that statement. But work is not God. If there's one bottom line for the talk today, it's that. Work is good, but work is not God. Say it with me. Work is good, but work is not God. We work as a form of worship, but we do not worship our work. And so I want to build for us today a theology of rest. It's not thorough. It's not complete. But as I do that, I want to draw your attention to a few books. You guys can go deeper with these 3 books. We'll pull these up on the screen. These are 3 books that I have read more than once, and I come back to these. To Hell with the Hustle, awesome book. The Elimination of Hurry, awesome book. And then John Ortberg's book, All on the Soul. Recommend you guys getting those books, especially for those of us that struggle to rest. Here's what I know. I think it's probably a Chicago thing, but I'll just kind of let you guys into my life. I work a lot. I am an achiever, pedals on the right all the time. It is hard for me to rest. It's not hard for me to nap. Kelly would be like, he is a good napper. But it is hard for me to practice Selah. It's not easy. And here's what I found. It's not really easy for anybody. Most people, especially Chicagoans, we know how to work, but do we know how to rest? Now, what we see in Genesis 2 is God is resting. He's resting, and that seventh day, he said it's holy. This is the Sabbath. And what we are seeing God do is God is making a declaration that, hey, the work is done. When you and I rest, we're also making a declaration as well. 4 declarations that we make when you and I choose to rest. I want to use REST as an acronym today to build this out. When you and I choose to rest, here's what you're saying. You are declaring that God is ruling. That's what you're declaring. God is ruling what? Answer, your life. God is the managing partner of your life. That's what you're saying. Somebody that is choosing to rest. I'm not talking about getting to a point where they're totally burnt out and have no choice. When somebody is choosing to Selah daily or weekly, when somebody is Shabbating, stopping, they're saying that there is someone that is in charge of my life, and it is God. God is on the throne of my heart. Now, here's something that I want us to get into for this point, this first point. God is ruling. Something called idolatry. Work is good, but work is not God. Tim Keller, in a number of different places, the way he defined idolatry, I found is the most helpful definition of idolatry. He says idolatry is when we turn good things into ultimate things. It would be easy to spot idols if they were bad things. I've done that too in my life. But haven't you found that idolatry for those of us that follow Jesus, it's good things that we have allowed to become ultimate things. Someone once said that idolatry isn't good for anybody, including the idols. And it's true. If you have turned your kids into idols, not good for your kids. If you've turned your job into an idol, not good for your job. If you've turned your employees, whatever it might be, your craft into an idol, it's not good for anybody, including you and including your idols. That's idolatry. It's turning good things into ultimate things. And when I say that word idolatry, perhaps your memory of the Old Testament, you're like, wait a second, I've heard of this word before. Yes, it's a big one in the 10 Commandments. The fourth of the 10 Commandments has to do with rest, to keep the Sabbath. And if you are not able to keep the Sabbath, if you are not able to have a day or a few hours, right? We're not under the law anymore, but if we can't have margin, if we can't close the laptop, if we can't put the phone away, if we can't choose to Selah, if you can't live out the fourth, it's oftentimes because you and I are failing at the first. We have allowed something good to become ultimate, and a lot of times that's your work, or that could be your kids. You have a disordered love. You have loves that are out of order. James K.A. Smith talks about this in his book, that what we need to do, and this is what Sabbath helps us do, when you and I practice Sabbath, when you and I practice Selah, we're able to examine the order of our loves. We're able to say, man, is God first and foremost, or have I allowed secondary or tertiary things to outseat God where he belongs? And so this is so important for you and I to think about. This is how it begins with the letter R. When you and I are resting, we are declaring that God is ruling our lives. Secondly, when you and I are resting, here's what you are declaring. You're making a declaration that God is enough. What a powerful declaration that your life and your rhythm of rest can declare. This is one of the ways that we live with a variance in differentiation to the rest of the world. The world can't rest, but we can, because God is enough. If you remember in the Old Testament, when God was leading the nation of Israel with a cloud of fire by night, and the pillar by day, or the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, he was feeding them with manna. What is this? Manna. And this is what God says. Hey, for 6 straight days, you're going to wake up and you're going to collect that manna, but not on the 7th day. And of course, they began to freak out, because that's what you and I do. We oftentimes live with a scarcity mindset, just like them. And he's like, you don't worry about the 7th day. I'll provide. I am enough. You need to rest. This is one of the ways God's people have stood out among the rest of the world, is not just how we work, but how we rest. We live with margin because God is enough. We live with margin in our calendar. We live with margin in our finances. We live with margin because God is enough. When you and I rest, we're making declarations. We're declaring that God is ruling my life. We're also declaring that God is enough. Now, I want you to think about Sabbath, Shabbat, meaning to stop. Psalm 46, I read that last week, right? Be still and know that I am God. The literal, this is so cool, the literal translation of that, Psalm 46, is let striving cease. Shabbat, stop. Selah. When you and I do that, we are saying that we can because God is enough. When I'm encouraging so many of us to really consider is what could a Sabbath look like? Now, you need to take into account your season of life. You got young kids, and I mean, we're not living under the law, okay? But think about the season of life that you're living in. But God's people, for a very long time, they've had a Sabbath. And as I'm learning from different people that are really impacting my life right now, like Tyler Staton and John Mark Comer and Dallas Willard and John Ortberg, to name a few, when they talk about this practice of Sabbath, they don't talk about drudgery, they talk about delight. And they say that this experience of Sabbath in the book, To Hell with the Hustle, that author, he says their Sabbath, for them, it's one day of the week. For me, it starts Thursday night. You look forward to it like you would look forward to Christmas. It's like a mini Christmas every week. It's a delight where you begin and you get your inner circle around the table. You're with your kids around the table and you cook your favorite meal, or you open a great bottle of wine, or you have your favorite soda, whatever it might be for you. But it's meant to be this day of delight. You know, for me right now, I'm training for another Ironman, and my Sabbath on Friday, a lot of that, at least like 4 to 5 hours, is spent alone on my bike, my road bike. And I ride out towards DeKalb and Sycamore. I'm out on these old kind of quiet roads, and it's just a time of delight. You know, just last week, I got in from like a 5-hour ride, and I was telling Kelly, I'm like, my heart is so full. For 5 hours, it's just been me, no music, just me and God together, delighting in his presence. Do you have that day of your week? And maybe in this season of life, it's a half day. I'll make a deal with you. Maybe it's just 2 hours. But when you and I practice rest, we're declaring that God is enough. What else? Letter S stands for God is sovereign. You know, David in Psalm 139, he says that all my ways, like in all my days, they're already in the book. Now, what God's people have believed for a very long time is that God is sovereign over our life, that nothing will touch my life that has not first been sifted through the sovereign hands of God. When I rest, I am declaring that God is sovereign. This is why I can be a son and not a slave. This is why you can be a daughter that chooses to rest. God is sovereign. It's an important truth. And a lot of times you'll sing the songs that speak about the sovereignty of God, but does your calendar reflect that God is sovereign? Does the rhythm of your life reflect that you actually believe that God is in charge, that God is sovereign, that God is ruling and reigning, that God is enough, that God is sovereign over every event of your life? Because here's what happens. When I choose to live without margin, and I've done that, guys, I've done that so many different times in my life, whether that's with work or finances, when there are no spaces between my load and my limits, really what I'm saying is I feel like I'm the God of the universe that is in charge. It's up to me. I call that Atlas leadership. You're familiar with Atlas, the weight of the world on his back. And friends, can I just encourage you, that's how the world lives. You and I are followers of Jesus. According to Jesus, we're meant to be salt and light. We're meant to represent and represent God to a watching world. And one of the ways that we do that, yes, it's how we work, but it's also how we rest. Letter T stands for this: trust. You cannot Selah, you cannot Sabbath, you cannot practice rhythms of rest without a ruthless trust in the goodness of God. Brennan Manning, in his book, Ruthless Trust, it's one of the all-time classic books. And you and I learning to trust God is one of the most important things that we could do. And I'm telling you, there's been so many moments where I've been struggling to Sabbath. I've been struggling to Selah. And the truth is because I don't trust God. But when I rest, I am declaring with my calendar and my time that I trust God is for me and not against me. That, like David writes in Psalm 139, I am hemmed in. It's this incredible truth to say that I'm surrounded by God. God's got me. God is familiar with all my ways. No matter where I go, He is with me. He is with me when I am going to work. He is with me when I am sitting down. He's with me, right? When I rise, and here we go, it's time to get after it, and He is with me when I am Shabbating, when I am stopping, when I am saying, all right, let striving cease. Why? I trust God. What I've been trying to do here for the past couple weeks is build for us a theology of work and a theology of rest. This is like an intro edition of this. This is like a 101 level. I've given you some good books that you guys can read further and look into, and I would encourage you to do that. This is so important for us as a church to practice these rhythms. And so for you and I, we got to really think deeply, how are we resting? And when we rest, we are declaring. I want to encourage you to not only work according to how the Bible has called us to work, but also rest according to how the Bible has called us to rest. Because when we work and when we rest the way that God has called us to, man, we stand out in the watching world. We draw people's attention to the one who has called us in the first place. That's all we have for Summer Selah. Part 2 is coming to a close. Now it's time to practice what you have heard me preach. We'll see you guys next weekend.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this week of Summer Selah. We can't wait to be back together as a church on Saturday, August 1st at 5 p.m. and Sunday, August 2nd at 8:15, 10, and 11:45. We'll see you guys soon. We love ya. We are Mission.